Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. We talk a lot about horror on this channel, but the real horror out there is how easy it is for your data to fall in the hands of disreputable people. That's why today's video is sponsored by Aura. While you're enjoying today's spooky video, data brokers, those things that go bump on the web, could already be selling your information to scanners, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, your health records, your relatives, they could all be out there. That's why I've been using Aura. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests, just for me. It was simple to use and very intuitive, and I had barely gotten out of the setup process, and it was already blocking over 20 data broker requests on my behalf. Aura protects your passwords, your banking information, everything you need for day-to-day online life. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it also protects me from hackers who could use my information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, other sensitive information. Things like a certain YouTube channel that you all enjoy listening to so much. Aura also does much more to protect me and my family from online threats, the kind you can't see. It comes with other features like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more, without having to download several different apps. It really is just that easy to set up, and best of all, I get everything at one affordable price. I hear you saying, but Dr. Plague, I have one or two of these tools already. But, dear readers, not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Readers of my fine tales can tell you why that never ends well. Aura is always on, doing the hard work of keeping me safe so I can focus on other tasks like finishing my latest book or uploading my most recent video. I value my privacy, and I know you value yours. You can go to Aura.com, that's AURA.com, to start your 2-week free trial. You can also check out the link below and start your free trial with Aura. So why not give Aura a try and protect yourself from the real monsters out there? Something is following me. I swear I can hear them at night outside my tent. I went on this solo 7-day hike, and it wasn't until the 3rd day that I noticed something was amiss. When I woke and exited my tent, my small makeshift camp looking as if it had been ransacked, my supplies scattered, small fire pit I had made had been destroyed, as though a large beast had stomped on it. The scariest part was the footprints left behind. They were all over the camp. They circled the tent dozens of times and seemed to come to rest at the door before heading away into the woods. I hadn't heard anything while I slept, and I assumed that it was just some hikers playing a trick on me. After I gathered my scattered supplies, I started back down the trail. The hike I was on was a remote and technically difficult hike that even the most seasoned hikers would have trouble accomplishing, which is what made me confused. Why would experienced hikers do something like that to my camp? Most hikers took this sport seriously. Ruining supplies could be a quick way to die from exposure. That day I hiked long and far, taking switchbacks and pausing for minutes at a time to watch the trail behind me. The mountain was empty. I even removed some of my footprints in the dirt, hoping to make it harder to track. That night I packed all my supplies in my tent and waited, certain that no one would have been able to follow me. I gripped my flashlight in one hand and lay down in my sleeping bag, waiting for a sound or a noise out of the normally silent woods. That's when I heard it, a twig snapping, a rustle of a bush, a rock being kicked and rolled across the ground. Tension shot through my body, and I froze, unable to move. My original plan was to rip open the tent door and shine my flashlight in my would-be stalker's face, but the sounds I heard made me look up. That wasn't the sound of humans. I saw no lights and heard no boots. Instead, it was the shuffle of something bestial, a large bear or a pack of wolves, maybe. Instantly, the sound grew closer, and I thought it had to be more than one animal circling the tent, pawing at the ground, breathing heavy and hoarse. A small sound coming from the back of a throat that sounded like a throaty, demented version of a laugh. Yuck, yuck, was the noise they made as they circled my tent, never coming close enough to touch or even graze it. Fear struck me hard and fast, and my first reaction was to curl up in my sleeping bag as if hiding from the world was my ultimate defense, like a little kid defending himself from a monster under the bed. Now I protect myself from the monsters outside the tent. The motion outside the tent exploded as the pace increased. The demented laughing was now coming from all sides, and I covered my ears trying to block out the noise before it drove me mad. Then, like a breeze in the wind, they were gone. The sounds slipped away into the night, and the torment stopped. My breath fell from my chest in what felt like minutes. I was terrified, and rightly so. Being alone on the mountain was always a bad idea. Hikers went missing here all the time. I just assumed they were inexperienced and got lost. Now I knew it was something more, something terrifyingly real. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay awake, unable to leave the tent for fear that they'd return, for the fear that they were waiting out there quietly for me to slip up and leave. When dawn's rays crested the hill to the east and bathed my tent in God's eternal light, I prayed for the first time in years. Normally, I'm not one for religious zeal, but I fell to my knees in that morning light and begged with tears in my eyes for any God to save me, to take me from this mountain, but nothing responded to my desperate plea. Now, I felt truly alone. The camp was a mess. The ground was torn up by dozens of odd footprints. They overlapped so much that I couldn't get an accurate shape to one, but they were deep prints indicating weight. Larger than dogs, at least, I said to myself as I traced my finger over one of the prints. I glanced around the camp and saw the footprints leading off back down the mountain the way I'd come. I was already more than halfway through the hike, and it would take me longer to go back the way I had come. Once I reached the peak, I could make my way down the opposite side, and the parking lot was where my truck was. By my calculations, it was around 3 more days and 2 more nights. I could make it. I hiked hard and fast that day and made great time. The mountain ended in a plateau, and I rested for only a moment. Normally, I would spend the day at the top, find a nice place to camp, and bask in the world from my seat on high. Today, I left instantly, glancing only for a moment to check my path. I could see my truck far below in the parking lot. The way down was a rocky path that normally I wouldn't have attempted, but this was an emergency. The sun was getting low, and I needed to find a place to camp. As I reached the edge of the woods, I paused and watched the sun as it fell faster and faster. A small clearing lay out before me in the long grass. To my back were all tall, sturdy trees with lots of branches at odd angles, like they were protecting me from the beasts that lurked behind me. I decided to set up my tent in the clearing, a few feet from the trees, next to a fallen tree with a large mass of roots exposed to the night sky. I kept looking over my shoulder as I worked, knowing these creatures only come out at night. Sweat beaded down my neck as I took a moment when I was done to drink some water and eat something from my pack. I gathered a large amount of wood from the trees and used some of my emergency lighter fluid to start a big cook fire outside my tent, with enough wood to burn for hours. An idea struck me while I ate and watched the trees. Taking my flashlight and gear, I made for the trees and climbed high. Along the branches, I found a secure spot where I could sit comfortably, and better yet, where I could watch my tent. For an hour, I sat in terrified silence, my heart beating out of my chest as I tried to calm myself. Maybe they wouldn't come tonight. Maybe I'd made it far enough away that they wouldn't be able to find me. That's when the noises started. The twigs snapping, the rustle of a bush behind me, the careful step of something coming closer and closer. I hugged tightly to the tree, keeping myself hidden from the sight below. My eyes were on the tent, wanting to see what was doing this. Tonight, I'd see them in the firelight of my camp below. The grass below my perch was now covered in darkness, but I could hear something moving there. I held my breath, hoping to avoid detection. The creatures would pass me with no hesitation. I watched as the shadows moved in the darkness below, too many of them to count in the poor light. They surrounded the tent and fire, silent as they moved. When one of them made that same sound from the back of their throat, it went hook-yook, and as if on signal, the campfire was scattered. Lit logs rolled and flew away as if something had swatted it with a giant hand. I could see bits of brown fur in the descending firelight, a large muscular paw, a hind leg, all covered in the same brown fur. Once the dark fell, they began taking their places, tearing up the ground around my camp. There, back of the throat laughing, I could hear my tent tearing. Deep growls of inhuman noise and heavy breathing for hours. They never left. They searched the same ground over and over again, as if blind, until an hour before dawn. Then they quietly slunk away, back up the mountain towards the peak. I hadn't slept at all, and I was feeling exhausted. My legs felt weak, and I slid down the last few feet of the tree, landing hard on my back. I lay there breathing heavy as the light from the morning sun bathed me in warm light. My tent had been shredded to pieces, and I now had no doubt in my mind that they were hunting me. Blood was on the ground beside the fire, where it looked like something had happened. Maybe the creatures had a fight amongst themselves during the night. I sighed, examining the tent, dropping the pieces of it I held. I turned and made my way down the rocky trail. Gone were the lush trees and the long grass of the peaks, and once more I plunged into the rocky, steep trail to the base. The trail was slow going as I climbed down rock faces and had to backtrack several times to find a different path. I could not spend one more night in this place. Far below, I could see my old red pickup truck in the parking lot, within my vision, but still far away. If I had a base jumping kit, I could be down there in a minute instead of hours. At various spots, I had to anchor with ropes that had been placed by previous climbers. I praised them and their families with good fortune, as this put a large distance between myself and the beasts. I traveled through the day and resolved myself to continue through the night. With no tent or cover, I'd be torn to shreds by those things. As the sun began to set, I doubled my pace. I knew somewhere along here was a rappelling site, a place with hundreds of feet of strong rope for you to descend to the final drop. After that, it was a short 5-minute walk to the truck. I couldn't find the rappel spot. I knew it had to be around here somewhere, but it seemed I was lost. I had seen the rappelling spot from my truck, but it seemed that now I was on the mountain, I could have missed it in dusk's light. I knew I had to backtrack slightly and made my way back up. Fear struck me again, knowing that the beasts were coming. As I climbed, I saw a bright green rope hanging from a series of anchors in the rock. I attached my harness and walked backwards off the rock. This is something I'd done a dozen times or more, and I made good time. Halfway down, I rested for a moment as the sun set behind me. That's when I felt it, something pulling on the rope above me. I jerked and began swinging side to side. I dropped slightly before I felt something pulling me back up the mountain. I began to rappel with increased fervor and dropped down the mountain faster than I had ever dropped before. I reached the bottom, but noticed the rope had shortened about 20 feet, and was slowly getting higher. The ground below was rocky and rough, but I had no choice. I unclipped myself from the line and dropped quickly to the ground. I landed awkwardly on a stone with my left leg and felt my ankle twist. I screamed out in pain, my leg burning. Despite this, I smiled. I'd escaped. The beasts weren't going to catch me now. I could see my red pickup truck down the hill, and I rose to my feet. The pain was intense, but I kept going, knowing this was my only chance. Behind me, I heard the impossible sound of rocks scattering as something heavy landed. I didn't dare glance over my shoulder, but I doubled my pace. I could hear heavy breathing and movement behind me. A small glade of young trees lay in my path, and I ducked into the thin branches for any sort of cover from the relentless pursuer. Yuck, yuck, came from behind me, and I froze, letting the foliage cover my face from sight. I barely dared to breathe as I heard the branches snapping around me. I could smell the foul breath of the beast as it crouched in a thin shield of branches and foliage. A poor armor indeed. Heavy breathing came closer and closer to me until it was right beside my ear. That back-of-the-throat laugh came out right beside my ear, making fear shoot up my spine and paralyzing me to the spot. This was it. The end. Whatever this creature was, it was going to kill me. I chanced a glance in its direction and stared right into its repulsive face. It bore a resemblance to a shaved wolf with its skin pulled back, a large mouth filled with raw and dangerously sharp teeth, and a large brown nose like a dog. Saliva dripped from its open mouth as it breathed in ragged breaths. The oddest part was its eyes. They were all white and filled with clouds, almost as if the creature was blind. I sat perfectly still as it sat within feet of me. It had a hunched back, almost like a human, but it moved on all fours like an animal. The creature smelled at the air briefly before growling and moving away through the foliage, making that yuck yuck sound as it left, as if it were mocking my fear. The creature couldn't see, I assumed. It reacted on movement, sound, maybe smell, maybe even all three. As the creature moved away, I quietly limped in the opposite direction towards the truck. Finally, I was in the parking lot, in the truck. I locked the door behind me and lay down on the seat, breathing for a moment. Planning my next move, with a jerk, I started the truck. My old faithful girl turned on in a single stroke. I flicked on my headlights and my heart stopped. In front of me was a dozen or so of the beasts, all crouched over, their eyes a milky pale unseeing. As the headlights hit their eyes, the beasts changed. They covered their eyes in pain, and I put the truck in drive. As I stepped on the gas, I realized my mistake. The fire that one night in the tree, the way they attacked it. With a smash, I felt one of them ram into the tailgate. I sped off down the road, swerving to avoid them. In my rear view, I could see them chasing me down the dark mountain road, and I sped up, keeping ahead of them. My ankle throbbed painfully, but I felt nothing as my adrenaline peaked again and again, and my fear warped into a new thing by the moment. The last I saw was their pale eyes in the darkness as I turned the corner onto the highway. By the time I saw other cars and people, I knew I was safe, and I drove nonstop for hours until I made it back to my place. The sun was just about to set as I locked the door behind me. I breathed a sigh of relief and poured myself a glass of scotch to calm my nerves. I fell against my bed and took a sip of my drink before I lay back in my blankets, exhausted from my fight with the creatures and them chasing me. I fell asleep in minutes. I woke up in the middle of the night to something outside my house. It sounded like something rubbing up against the front door. My heart froze as I thought of what it could be. That's when a slight knock sounded at the door. just loud enough for me to hear before a sound that chilled me to the bone. A deep laugh coming from the back of someone's throat. Hook yuck. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. My time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.